I am really excited to introduce you to our speaker. Tami Forman is the Chief Executive and Executive Director of Path Forward, which is a nonprofit organization that creates mid-career internship programs to ease the transition back to work for women and men after taking a break for raising children or many other career-giving responsibilities. Path Forward has worked with more than 80 employers, including Amazon, Netflix, Walmart, Apple, Comcast, NBC, Universal, Verizon, and SAP to launch, implement, and expand these programs. Before she founded Path Forward, Tami spent a decade as a tech marketing executive with data solutions provider Returnship. Before that, she worked in book publishing at Simon & Schuster and Houghton Mifflin and held senior level editorial positions at iVillage and News Corporation. She's a frequent speaker on issues related to women's participation in the workforce, and she also writes a career column for Forbes, is a Fairy God Boss VIP, we won't hold that against you, and was named by FlexJobs as one of the top 20 career experts for working moms. Tami lives in New York City with her husband and two kids aged 11 and 13, so clearly you just have all the time on your hands. Tami, I'm so excited to get the chance to introduce you, and I'm really excited to get to feed some of the audience questions to you later. Until then, I would love to turn the stage over to you and let you take it away.
Meg, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be back on the Power to Fly stage. Let me see if I can quite elegantly share my screen here. Let's do this thing. Oh, we did it. Hooray. Excellent. I'm super excited. And as Meg mentioned, feel free to chat questions. We're definitely leaving 15 minutes at the end of my talk for questions. So we'll have plenty of time, but I want you to, feel free to interact, feel free to jump in with questions. Meg will feed those to me and I'm happy to take them as we go. But I wanted to start out by talking just for a minute about Path Forward. We are a nonprofit organization, as Meg mentioned. We are on a mission to empower caregivers to restart their careers. I will talk about what caregivers mean and careers and all of that in much more detail in this talk. But I'm super excited to be here and to tell you more about these great programs. As Meg mentioned, we actually work with more than 90 companies now, some really great ones that I'm super proud to be affiliated with. So what is a returnship? Hopefully some of you have heard of these by now. They have, in the last 5 years since we've been around, gotten a lot more press, gotten a lot more interest, and I would say particularly in the last year, as everybody's been paying a lot more attention to people leaving the workforce, women particularly leaving the workforce, and particularly leaving the workforce because school shut down, no childcare, all of those things. So returnships are temporary programs. They generally last about 12 to 24 weeks. They are paid. I'll talk more about that because I know that's a question a lot of people have. They are for people at the mid-level. So, and I'll talk for a minute about the difference between different kinds of ships, not relationships, which is how my 13-year-old uses that ship word, but the other kind. So they're for people with 5 years of experience. I'll talk more about that. They generally have some specific functional qualifications. I'll talk more about that. And they require a care gap. And I'll talk about all of that. So really quickly, what are these different ships? So many of you may be familiar with college internships. Maybe you even did one, right? And generally, those programs are really for college students. Sometimes regulatorily, they're for college students because they're not paid and they involve credit. Even when they're paid, a lot of companies really restrict them to people who are either in college or just about to graduate. There's not a lot of expectation of having experience or being able to do things, but there's also not generally, for most internships, a lot of on-the-job training. It's more exposure to, and you get to do some things and learn about that company, and it's a chance for them to get to know you and see if you might be a fit for an entry-level job. Apprenticeships are something that have been around for, I think, centuries. I mean, this is a very old concept. Most people know of them more in the trades, right? But in the last few years, they've become a little bit more popular with tech companies. There's very different kinds of them. Some people say apprenticeship, and they really mean more of like a returnship or more of another kind of program. But a true apprenticeship will have some on-the-job training in addition to on-the-job work, right? So they'll have some classroom training around a given function or skill. that then, also includes some work-based learning, and then, generally convert at a very high rate. Returnships are for people returning to their career, right? So unlike a college internship for people who are starting, unlike an apprenticeship for people who are learning a new trade or learning a new skill, returnships, as the name suggests, are people who are returning to a career they had before. Now, I'll talk about pivots and how you might pull off a pivot with a returnship, but they generally have some expectation that you'll have some relevant skills. There's some mentoring and there may be some on-the-job training, but it's much more job experience. They do convert at a high rate. We see about 80% of people who go through a Path Forward program converting into full-time jobs. And they tend to be aimed at specific populations like caregivers, although, that's something that's changing as more and more people are leaving the workforce for all kinds of reasons and starting to look to return. So what does caregiving mean in that context? For us, we want to be inclusive about this. We don't ask our employers to interrogate people around their reasons for leaving the workforce. If you think this is the right program for you, we believe this is the right program for you. We certainly think about caregiving as a very broad concept. It is true that typical Path Forward participants, for example, are former stay-at-home mothers, right? People who left the workforce to take care of a child for some number of years and are looking to return. But we've worked with many, many people who were out because they had an elder relative who was ill, maybe even a not elder relative who was ill and needed care. Their own health was an issue and they needed to take time off from their career. They needed to focus on their own health. Military spouses who need to pick up and move on a regular interval, people who are trailing spouses, right? People who move for their partners' careers within a corporate setting, which is something that's very common and very typical, and something that we see. So, we think of caregiving as a broad concept. It is true that most caregivers tend to be women, and this is something we just saw with the pandemic, right, where women left the workforce in very large numbers. Because there was an expectation that they are the caregivers for the family. And again, whether that means children, elder relatives, all those kinds of categories. So when we think about a returnship, what kinds of skills are required? This is a question I get asked pretty regularly. So first of all, with our programs, and this is pretty true of most companies that are running returnship programs, there's a job description, right? So there are returnships in engineering, in marketing, in finance, in, name a job. There are some number of returnships. They are certainly more common on the tech side, both in terms of tech companies and tech jobs. It's where there's a lot of need for workers right now. So those returnships will have a list of skills that are required. The way I think about this is, and the reason I have a bike here is because I think about it as if you knew how to ride the bike before, you probably know how to ride the bike now. Like they're looking for someone, so you may need some, time, which is the returnship period, to get back to being as proficient at that skill as you might have been when you were working full time. But you have some familiarity. I think it's really important to remind people, especially women, that the laundry list of skills on any job description, whether it's a returnship or not, are not all required. Like, if you can do half, like you're competing with probably a bunch of guys who think they can do about a half too, maybe even a little less. So you don't have to tick every box. But what I tell people about a returnship, and this kind of goes to the pivot question, right? Can I use a returnship to pivot? If you have never coded professionally in your life, right? If you've never worked as a software developer, maybe you've done a course, maybe you've done even a high intensity boot camp, but you've never actually professionally coded, an engineering returnship is probably not going to be the right fit for you, right? They're looking for someone who spent a period of time as a professional coder, may need to get up to speed with the latest technologies, right? May need to learn some new languages, may need to learn some new coding skills, but has had that experience. If you are coming in completely fresh to this profession, having never done it professionally before, you're much better looking for entry-level positions and making a case for why you think you would be a good fit for an entry-level position, even though they're going to say you're overqualified. We'll talk about that more later. But I think of a returnship can be a great way to pivot from a career that has some amount of transferable skills. So if you were you were a communications professional, you PR and marketing, you've taken some online courses on digital marketing and ad buying and things like that, and you want to do a returnship in digital marketing, right? That's going to be a much more natural fit and much more of a pivot if you're going from different types of corporate environments where you've had some corporate experiences where there's more of a need for the I hate soft skills because I think the soft skills are actually the hard skills, but skills that are transferable, right? Like project management, program management, right? If you had a tech job and you want to pivot into one of those, returnships can be a good fit. So again, looking at those list of skills and experiences they're looking for and see where you think you can fit. So the great thing about returnships, the thing that I think makes them really awesome is the support that they generally include. So most companies that run returnships provide some level of support. They provide training for their managers and create a context for the managers to be supportive. There's often buddies and mentors. There's sometimes lunch and learns with senior executives. There's often opportunities for you to get together with other returners in your cohort if they're doing a cohort style. So there's a lot of opportunities for support within returnships. The companies we work with, we support their returnees as well through our own work with their communities and with their cohorts, and do that across different companies. So returners at companies that are working with Path Forward get exposure to returners at other companies that we're working with as well, which also adds an extra layer of support. But they're generally set up to be to truly be an on-ramp to help you get back into the workforce successfully. So probably a question I get asked pretty frequently is what the pay is like for returnships. So the first thing I wanted to underline is that returnships should be paid. If you find yourself in a situation where you're offered something that's not a paid situation, that's not a returnship. I don't know what that is, but you should run for the hills. But they're mostly paid. How they're paid, both in terms of like the structure of the pay and the level of pay, depends on the company. So smaller companies will often pay hourly. Larger companies may pay a prorated salary for the 3 or 4 months of the returnship. So they're all temporary. So they're all predicated on that amount of time. It just depends on whether they code you as an hourly contractor or whether it's a salaried position but with a defined end date. Sometimes there are benefits offered, sometimes there are not. The pay ranges in terms of like the hourly equivalent, again, whether it's coded as hourly or salary, ranges, it can be anywhere from, I would say, what we're seeing right now is about $30 an hour to up to about $60 an hour. The spread there is both a geographic spread, noting that a lot of returnships are now remote. It's both geographic and it's also functional, right? Engineers in San Francisco are going to command those higher levels. Marketers in the middle of the country may be on the lower end of that scale. But the biggest message I want to send to people when it comes to returnship pay is to not get too caught up in that. And I mean that in a couple of ways, right? So I think the returnship period is 3 or 4 months. You should be playing a long game, right? Like, don't get too focused. It's perfectly appropriate to ask the interviewer, hey, if I were to convert at this company into this job, what would the full-time equivalent be? It's certainly fair and very appropriate to ask what the salary range might be for a full-time job in that category. But I advise people not to get too caught up in the hourly rate for the 4 months, or whether it includes benefits or whether it doesn't. Obviously, some of these things are very nice. It's great when bigger companies are able to offer more during the program. But I really think it behooves people to be playing a longer game, both in terms of thinking about whether or not this company would be a good place for you to convert into a full-time job. We've worked with some mid-sized companies that are amazing places to work, right? Amazing places to work with, by the way, good pay and amazing benefits when you convert into that full-time job. So you can kind of play a little bit of like, oh, I want this one because it pays a little higher and it includes benefits. And look, we all have our financial obligations that we need to think about. But I tell people often, like, you're not getting paid anything now, you don't have access to benefits. Like, this is an opportunity for you to get into a great company. So kind of like take a little bit more of a holistic view of what the opportunity is, what the job category is. Like, is this going to be something you're going to be good at, that you're going to want to learn, that you're going to, you're going to grow. And you can, this is this period of time, and you can take that in all kinds of directions, both at the end of the returnship and as your career moves on into the future. So we also get a question a lot about whether or not returnships are flexible. So I feel like I now talk about this a little bit different than I think I used to talk about it, because flexibility is such a different concept right now. So every company we're working with right now is remote, and they're doing the returnships remotely. Some of them are recruiting for remote returnships, but they're looking for people who are within commuting distance of given offices, because they are assuming that they will go back at some point. In some cases full-time, more often in a hybrid fashion. So, and a lot of them are not sure yet. So this is kind of, there's a lot of things in flux right now about kind of how companies are thinking about remote. But I think when I think about flexibility within a full-time corporate job, meaning the ability to work from home, the ability to take time when you need it, the ability to work, different hours if you need to, like, something's come up, it's the beginning of the school year, drop-offs and pickups have changed, I need some time to get into the routine. I can work my 40 hours, but I need to work them in a slightly different way for a couple of weeks, or maybe even longer than that. I think the genie's out of the bottle on that kind of flexibility, like for everybody. Like the idea that that's not possible is like, no, it clearly is for a lot of jobs. And for the jobs it's possible for, I think it's going to stay possible. If flexibility to you means like, I would like to be able to have the summer off, or I'd like to, work a 20-hour week, the returnships are not going to be the right fit for you. You're going to want to look for more project work, freelance, consulting. There are plenty of other ways to have generate income that have more of that kind of flexibility, where you want to work a more reduced schedule, or you want to work different times throughout the year, throughout the week, etc., that kind of thing. But I think if you are looking for someone who's looking to go back to a full-time corporate job, but you're thinking like, oh, it's a pain when there's a random holiday, or it's a pain to like do all these things that I need to do and make up a little bit of time in the evening when my kids are, not paying attention to me anyways, because they're on the Xbox all night. That just me. Right. So that kind of flexibility is just more possible everywhere, including within returnships. So I think it's never been a better time for people who want to go back to work and want to work in a slightly different way to do that. And do they lead to full-time jobs? Yes, 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 and yes. And I say that not just because I've seen the conversion rate be very high with companies we work with. I look at a lot of other companies that do returnships, and when they publish numbers, I make note of them, like anywhere between 75 and 80, even 90, 95% is pretty typical for a lot of companies in terms of their conversion rates. Companies do these programs because they want to find people they're going to hire. The reason they have a list of qualifications and skills, by the way, I think one thing to think about is when it's kind of an open call, some of those programs can be great, but like when there's a list of skills and qualifications, they're looking for someone who has those skills and qualifications because they have that job. They need someone to do that job, right? So they lead to full-time jobs at that company, but it's important to recognize that the experience you get and the relationships you build in a returnship can also lead to a full-time job somewhere else. So we have definitely seen people who did not get converted at the company where they did their returnship go on to what, frankly, from their perspective is an even better job, right? Maybe in a better company for them, maybe a better job for them, a better fit, maybe maybe a better commute. We had one of those. So often those non-converters the returnship becomes the jumpstart, truly becomes the jumpstart to getting into that next thing and landing really in a really great place. So, is a returnship right for me? This is one of those personal questions. Only you know what you're looking for. I am telling people right now, to be perfectly honest with you, because the economy is so hot and there's just so much going on. generally companies are looking for people who've been out from anywhere from 2 years or more. There's a few companies that are now saying anyone who's been out for a year or more. I will say, if you've only been out of work for a year, year and a half, maybe you left in March, 2 years, you can get a job. There's a lot of jobs out there. I'm not going to say it's easy. And you can certainly look at returnship experiences. They can be great for people. We've worked with people at all ends. But I think that there's so much happening right now. If you have a good, strong network, and you have some skills that are in demand, I think focusing on full-time opportunities is not a bad strategy. But if you've been out, and we've seen this, if you've been out for 5 years, 10 years, we've worked with people who've been out 15, 20 years, returnships can be great. They can be a really great option. And again, I've worked with people from a year out to 22 years out. I think that was the longest one I know of. Maybe I might be missing somebody. They can work for people at all ends of the spectrum, but they're really great for people who are who've been out for a long time, who are looking for that opportunity to get back in, get their feet under them, do that in a supportive environment. So I'm going to open up for questions. And actually, I'm seeing the chat. Sorry, I'm trying to pay attention.
No worries. I got that covered for you.
Thank you, Meg.
You're
what is
welcome.
the best way to pivot to a new industry and return after caregiving?
Yeah,
So,
Tia, this is a great question. And for those of you who don't have access to the Zoom chat, or sorry, to the group chat right now, Tia had asked what is the best way to pivot into a new industry and return after caregiving? And I kind of love, I don't know if you dove too deep into this, but I love the terminology of caregiving because it kind of covers a lot of different things that people may or may not really feel comfortable discussing with other people. It also doesn't have the gendered sort of, unfortunately, connotation that comes with, oh, I was raising a family.
Yeah.
It's BS that we have to make that distinction, but you're right. So what advice would you give to Tia here?
Yeah. So look, I think, so we could do a whole session on career pivots, and I know Power to Fly has done some of those. I'm happy to come back, but the way I think about career pivots is, there's pivoting the job that you do, and there's pivoting the industry within which you do that job. So when Tia says, what's the best way to pivot into a new industry? If you mean, hey, I was an in-house lawyer and I'd like to go to a firm, or vice versa. Vice versa is probably more common. I was an accountant and I'd like to get into tech. By the way, tech companies hire accountants. Did you all know that? They hire all the things that every other company hires, right? I'd like to get into tech. Tech is really hot, and then everybody thinks like, oh, I need to go take a boot camp to be a software developer. If you want to be a software developer, go for it. People who like it. It looks like people who like it. Let's just leave it there. But there's lots of other jobs at tech companies, right? So the way to pivot, if you have a job skill that is relevant to that industry, is to make the case for yourself within that industry, but also look for returnships. We do have returnships at some of the tech companies we work with that are in jobs outside of software and engineering. For people who are looking to really start a new job, right? Like, I've never been a marketer before, I'd like to be a marketer. I've never been an engineer before, I'd like to be an engineer. That is where I recommend people actually look for entry-level jobs. And the trick of it is you are going to get told you're overqualified, right? And they mean many things when they say that. They might mean you're too old. So it's the gray-haired lady on your screen. They may mean we think you're going to get bored, right? We're worried you're going to get, we legitimately think you're overqualified and that you'll get bored with this entry-level job and you'll move out elsewhere. So look, there's nothing you can do if they mean you're too old. Like, it just is what it is. But if they mean we think you're going to get bored, or we don't it's kind of almost like we don't believe that you really want to do this, is to make the case for yourself. Hey, I understand why you think I'm overqualified. I would be overqualified for this level of job in my old career, right? Like, yes, I would be totally overqualified for an entry-level job in what I used to do. But this is new for me, and I'm actually really excited about the chance to get experience in this field. And by the way, what I do bring to you is a set of skills and experiences that are transferable, right? I know how to manage competing agendas, for example. I know how to deal with different personalities. I know how to manage a project, right? Whatever. So, make a list for yourself of all the skills you have that are just sort of great professional skills, things that you need to do to be a competent person. So you're going to get, so you, Mr. Job Hirer person, you're going to get someone who's eager and enthusiastic to learn new things, who's excited to be in this field, and who has all these other skills that some, frankly, 22-year-old is not going to come in here with. So you're getting a bargain, right? You're getting the opportunity and I'm in it to win it, right? I want to be here. I'm restarting my career. I'm super excited for the chance to do that.
I love that. I love the kind of pointing out that you did about the fact that, like, them saying these things, it tells you a lot about the company, but it also, how you respond and how they respond to your answers is right. Just as important. If they are honestly listening and saying like, oh yeah, I can totally see, you're bringing value in this and this and this, or you're right, that's a culture gap that we don't have a fit for in our team. That's yours is a perspective that we're missing. It's one of those things that you really do have to pay attention to, not only the questions that you're asking, but the way they're being answered and the way they are interpreting or responding to your questions and your answers. It's huge.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a lot of great conversations happening in the chat thread on the website right now. Shruti, who it looks like is one of the past Path Forward returnees, Shruti Katyal, I hope I'm not butchering your name. I'm sorry, Shruti. She's in here chiming up about how she would highly recommend taking the boot camp or short courses to help you get back in the game. That she can't explain how much Path Forward has been life-changing for her. So Thank you so much, Shruti, for joining us for today's event and sharing, your experience and the testimonials you can give. Okay, we did have another question in the chat. So let's touch on this. Ipsita had asked, let's see, how do you handle when your pro bono work, which has kept your skill set alive and constitutes your portfolio, how do you balance that with the elder care you've been doing for years when you're trying to discuss this or talk about it with an employer? They said, I'm mindful that there is a gap, but it's not entirely visible because it happened in fits and starts. And I also have this, other work that I was doing that fills in my resume. How do you talk about needing to update some of your skills in a returnship or not having hard industry experience when what you've been doing is volunteer wise or as a on a pro bono basis? How would you tackle this concern?
So this is a great question, and it's actually something we talk about a lot because when we work with employers, they will sometimes say to us, hey, I've got all these great resumes, but I can't tell whether or not they've been out of the workforce. And I'm not sure if they're qualified, if they meet the criteria. So what I tell people first and foremost, I'll talk about the pro bono thing in a second, but in general, you don't necessarily have to have a resume for every single different job that you apply for, but if you're applying for both returnships and not returnships, you should have a returnship resume, right? You should have a returnship resume that actually makes the gap seem as big, you know what I mean? That actually makes the gap ooh, look at that big, huge gap right there in the middle, right? That is what they are looking for. And I think people forget that. So you can have a different resume that highlights that hey, was out of work for caregiving.
Oh yeah, when I was still applying, I came from a bizarre background. So I had an art history resume, I had an admin resume, I've been a people manager resume. And so yeah, you make this one version, keep it to the side. That way, yes, you can make tweaks, but you're also not having to reinvent the wheel every time you do this. Because not everything you apply for is going to be a returnship, right?
100%. And especially going back to the career pivots, by the way, if you are making a pivot, you need a resume and a cover letter. And I'll talk about the cover letter in a second, that makes the case for the pivot you're making. do not ask hiring managers to imagine. They can't. They don't have time. Nobody has time to imagine what you could be doing. But if you spell it out for them and you make those connections. So coming back to this question, this is like, you should take credit for all the great things that you've done. For a returnship resume, I would say, I would put at the top, right, left the paid workforce for caregiving, and you don't have to get into any details, during that time, did several pro bono projects that included, and by the way, they can also be consulting or freelancing. I tell people all the time, the employers we work with are not looking to like ding you because you had any income whatsoever. I just tell people to always be honest, like be honest about it. Hey, I was underemployed working at the Gap because I needed like school hours and I didn't have time to get a real job, but now I want to come back to marketing, finance, engineering, whatever, right? Like those kinds of things are okay, but you have to make the case for it. Again, you can't make them imagine like, wait, why is this person who's been working for 4 years at the Gap applying to a returnship? That makes no sense, right? You have to spell that out for them. You can do it on the resume, or you can do it on the cover letter, which is a perfect place to actually tell a story that resumes are not built to tell. Don't have to go into a novel, but we can just kind of make the compelling case for the switch that we're making, for the why we think we belong in a returnship. So Meg, I just saw the question come by about where to find returnship opportunities. So I'm going to share my screen again real quick because I have a couple slides. And by the way, I have given these slides to the Power to Fly folks. So there's a handout that you will get. So where do I sign up for these kinds of opportunities? So there is a page on the Path Forward website where you can sign up for our newsletter. You'll get job alerts every week. You can explore opportunities. You can see all the jobs at every company that we work with. But we also have a page on our site. And again, this is linked from this handout that you'll get from Power to Fly called Returnships Around the US. And we link to every program we know about. We're a small staff, so we do our best. Actually, if you know of programs that are not on here that you are familiar with, email us. Seriously, use that email and email us. We will add it if we don't have it. So we're happy to keep that up to date. So check that out. We can't speak to these programs. We don't work directly with them. They may be active now. They may not. They may be taking applications. They may not. But we're hoping to at least be a resource for y'all. There are a bunch of great companies and organizations working in this space. So I wanted to just kind of do a shout out here to a couple others. Obviously, Power to Fly is one of the great people in this space and trying to help women and work with people who are trying to get their careers going or restarting them. I relaunched, they're one of the oldest and biggest, and they've been doing this for a real long time, going back to the days of Goldman Sachs and their first returnship back in 2008. Reboot Excel, relatively new. They do some good work. Pray. The Mom Project has some great project work for people who are. The Mom Project is a great resource if you've had a slightly shorter break. They're great for people who are looking for a project or short-term consulting gig to kind of get themselves back reestablished and kind of get in somewhere. So I would check all of these folks out. And yeah. And like I said, I just have some great links in here that you all, I think, will find helpful. We do some webinars, so I put some links in there for y'all if you want to check out some of our webinars, ways to connect with us. So you'll get all that. But those are the best places to kind of go find more opportunities.
Excellent. Thank you for diving into that for us. We only have about 10 minutes, actually a little less than 10 minutes left in this session before we move into our midday networking, which I'm hosting, so I hope you'll join.
And Meg, I wanted to mention to everybody who's watching right now, I'm going to hang out in the networking lounge with y'all. So like, see, I'm coming.
Thank you.
So I'll come to that. I would love to tackle Marina's question right here, Meg, that I see. So Marina asked about if you've got different resumes, how do you deal with LinkedIn? Because this is a question I get asked a lot. So one of my favorite pieces of style advice from that lady with the gray streak, I can't remember, Stacy, what's her name? Stacy Francis?
Stacy London, she's the reason
Stacy London, right?
So I love her.
Right. My favorite piece of advice to her when it comes to like your bag and your shoes and your dress, like they don't have to match, but they do have to go. So I think the same thing is true for your resumes and your LinkedIn. They don't have to match, but they do have to go, right? So meaning like your LinkedIn, you can think of as like home base. And by the way, if you have really different resumes, if you're looking for really different things, I would keep the LinkedIn much more simple, like dates and, you know, not as much detail, because the less detail, the less you're having to, like, you know, make things go with each other. But if it's just some slight things, you can just have that be your sort of basic CV, right? Like the basic list of things you've done, where you've done them, whatever. But then the things that recruiters look for that will raise a red flag if they don't match: dates, company names, titles. That's a big one. Big red flag for a recruiter if you have a different title on your resume than your LinkedIn. Dates are a big one, right? So like one thing I advise people to do is, like, LinkedIn should be everything you've done, right? Most everything. You can obviously not include things if you don't want to. But if your resume, because you're going for a specific type of job, you only want to include some things, you can just put a link. So Meg was so kind to do my whole intro, right? And all the crazy jobs that I've had. So like when I started looking for marketing jobs after, you know, having been in marketing for a long time, having been in publishing for a little while, but then having all these random, like other, like little publishing jobs along the way, whatever, I just put a line at the bottom of my resume that was like, other positions held at these 3 companies, right? So if someone looked at my LinkedIn, they would say, oh, okay, you know, those are there, but just not a lot of detail, because there's no reason to, frankly, talk about the things I did 20 years ago. So you can kind of make the resume, I think of the resume as a subset, almost like the curated version of what's on your LinkedIn, which might be a little bit longer. Now, the flip might also be your LinkedIn could be a little bit shorter, just have the places you've worked, you know, your, you know, titles and things like that. And the resume has the more detail about that job, because that's where you're focusing your energy on, like, here's why I'm qualified for this.
That makes the most sense to me too. Because so I have had to do this. Like I said, you know, I had multiple resumes that I used depending on what job I was applying for. I have a very bizarre work history cobbled together from, you know, economic factors and opportunities that I was able to find. But you're right, it makes for a very confusing story, especially at first glance. And so I love the idea of kind of utilizing your LinkedIn as like a distillation of this. Because especially for me, I didn't really change so much about like what was displayed in my resume when I would turn it in, like it's an assignment. But you know what I mean? Didn't change that much about titles and stuff, but I changed maybe the phrasing on what I did there. So that was a little bit of a way to make sure that my resumes, as I was submitting them, reflected that job and were tailored a little bit there, but also it wouldn't be confusing for you to go to my LinkedIn profile and see like, well, why did you describe it like this here, but you're describing it like, you know, what your tasks were differently here. So I think that one's huge. We have a ton of questions still coming from the chat, so I'm going to try and see if we can get to some more of those. But for those asking about LinkedIn connections, I did put my LinkedIn information in the chat thread. I'm not sure how much I can do for you because Tami's the expert here, but I'm always happy to connect with members of our Power to Fly community. I know I'm terrible about LinkedIn, but I will make an effort to do a better job. I'm so sorry, y'all. All right. Kristen wants to know, what do you think about putting career break on LinkedIn? I know they added this feature, but I'm hesitant to have that at the top of my LinkedIn profile when people look at it. Kristen says, I'm trying to return to work and do not yet have a position to join, you know, to pivot from. What would you say to do in this case?
So this one's such a funny question for me. I love that LinkedIn is doing this. Let me just say that. I love they did this. I love that they did this. I love that they're normalizing this. I would love if we could all normalize not having to work every single day of our lives from like the moment we graduate college until the day we die. Like I would love that to just be like normal, that people like have a job and then maybe they take a little time off and then maybe they come back. Like I just wish like the idea that like, you know, if there is any gap of any length on your resume, like I would love that.
Well, you're taking a gap. You're not disappearing into a parallel universe. Like
right. So I love that they're normalizing family caregiving, right, as a category, right? I love that they're normalizing that. I love that they're gender neutral-ish about it, right, where they have stay-at-home dad and stay-at-home mom and stay-at-home parent, and like I love it. it's very hard for me to then turn around to a woman and say, yeah, go for it. Like, it is just not our individual job to end discrimination and bias against us. And I don't know that I can tell you with a straight face that, like, yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah, that'll be fine. Now, look, I do tell people all the time, when you are applying to returnship positions, you 100% should put that at the top of your resume. It really, like, some of these programs are really competitive. We work with big companies, hundreds and hundreds of people apply. You want to make it as easy as possible for the recruiter to identify that you are a viable candidate. And part of that is identifying that you've been on a career break. So I want to just be clear that when you're applying for programs that are for you, right, underline that fact. Would I put it on LinkedIn where the whole world can see it? I might later, but
I like your approach, because you're right. Not everyone is resourced enough to be able to take this as a stand. It's part of the main reason that I tend to be very open about sharing like my mental health issues, because I am lucky and resourced enough to be in a position where my job supports it, and I'm not concerned about sharing that information and having that negatively impact my hireability. Yeah. But not everyone is resourced like that. And so it's incredibly important to recognize that if it's one of those things you would like to do, you'd like to see that not be a problem in the world, and you are okay with doing that, and what some of the repercussions, unfortunately, in our times currently might be, go ahead and blaze that trail. If you are not, it's okay.
It's okay to not. The one thing I would say, Meg, is I do think it's important for people to think about, like, recruiters are smart, and they will fill in the gap themselves with their own imagination. So, do I think it is going to help you? Probably not. Do I think it's going to hurt you? Maybe, but also, like, but not having anything there and just having the gap is probably doing the same thing. So if it makes you feel like at least you're taking ownership of it, and for recruiters who are open to people who are returning, like, I actually don't think it, I'm going to just say it this way. I don't think it makes a difference. I don't think it hurts you. I don't think it helps you. I think taking ownership of that is fine. I think leaving it off is fine. Okay. I think it's a personal decision. Yeah, I love this question from Jennifer.
So, okay, Jennifer has some great questions, but we have to stay on time because I have to jump at 12:45. So I'm so sorry. Jennifer, that is a great question. Please come to the networking event so that way y'all can continue chatting with Tami. I'm so sorry to cut you off because this is like fabulous and there's so many good questions. But if you would like to take a quick break in the middle of the day, I highly recommend you come with us to the networking session. My coworker Sanmaya is going to share the link to that in just a moment here. So can't wait to see y'all join us over there. If you are looking to earn SHRM credits from today's sessions, you're going to want to use the code that's in the top of the panel, or sorry, top of the slide in front of you. I got to bounce so I can go run the party over on Gather Round. But Tami, thank you so much. This was lovely. It was so nice to get to chat with you again.
Thank you so much. And I'll see you all in Gather Round.
All right. Bye, y'all. See you there.